Hello, Watch Forest Focus as we reconvene to discuss some breaking transfer rumours around Anthony Elanga and a potential PSR-related swap deal with Newcastle United. In short, multiple media outlets say Forest have spoken with Newcastle about selling Elanga to them, while Forest will buy either, or perhaps both, Yankuba Minteh and Elliot Anderson in a separate deal or deals this weekend to help solve Newcastle's PSR problems before the June 30 accounting cut-off. Forest need to sell to be safe themselves, but they're hoping they can move on Orel and Mangala and Moussa Niakhate to Lyon, meaning they don't have to sell Elanga unless they really want to. He joined from Manchester United a year ago for 15 million on a 5-year deal, meaning anything over 12 million would, in theory, be PSR profit, although it's very possible United have a sell-on clause. Finally, in this very, very long intro, Sky Sports have reported the potential deal with Forest might not happen because Forest don't really want to or need to sell, but lots of moving pieces with this one before the cut-off tomorrow. Right, with all that in mind, I'm joined by Newcastle fan Rob Smyth, who's given us his insight before Premier League fixtures, so it's good to have him back to give us his take on Minteh, Anderson and what's going on in general with the PSR madness at Newcastle. Rob, that was a 90-second intro. That might be a record. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Good, thank you.
Well, good to have you with us. Lots to get through, like I said. Probably start trying to put some context on what's going on at Newcastle so we can understand why they're so panicked and why they're offering up two very good young players to move on, and also thought they were trying to sell Anthony Gordon, Alexander Isak. It sounds pretty desperate. What's going on at their end?
Well, I think over the last few years since they got taken over by the PIF-led Saudi consortium, there's obviously been a hell of a lot of investment at Newcastle after 14 plus years of chronic underinvestment. But the issue with that, while we have seen results on the pitch improve, has also meant that we've become very close to the PSR line. And it seems that the latest accounts, which would have to be put in by the end of this month, mean that, and the rumours that we're hearing with regard to many deals mean that we're either close to that line or we're probably more likely going to breach it, which could potentially result in a fine or a points deduction. So over the last week or so, as well as Newcastle trying to offload fringe players such as Callum Wilson, the likes of Miguel Almiron, there's also been a hell of a lot of interest in some strange deals or potential deals arrive over the last couple of days, such as Chelsea coming in for Alexander Isak, a potential move to Liverpool for Anthony Gordon, and then obviously a lot of movement and talk around this exciting youngster, Yankuba Minteh, and it's all been it's all come like almost like a freight train for Newcastle fans, I think, because there's been a lot of talk over the last couple of transfer windows. I've been sailing extremely close to the wind in terms of PSR, but the last week is almost a desperation seems to have crept in from the club, and it's almost dawned on a lot of supporters that potentially the situation was a lot worse than it is actually been, and that's why they're, rather than being unable to shift fringe players, they're having to actually probably sell somebody who potentially could be a great player for the club eventually, or even one of the prime assets. So a bit of a strange time for the fans of the club, really. And we've not even really kicked off the official transfer window yet. So
yeah, it is this kind of false transfer window that Forest are involved with as well. And hopefully it feels like Forest hold the cards on this one. It's interesting. I mean, Luke Edwards from The Telegraph tweeted just before we started recording this, could we even see Minteh and Anderson go to Forest? So lots of finances around that. And it's a very kind of an unknown business how transfers are even working out now. But like you say, they are two exciting young players. Interestingly, when I first saw the Anderson link, I was like, no thanks. And I think a lot of fans were, because we like Elanga. But it's good to get some perspective on each of the two lads because they are really highly rated at Newcastle. So I thought we'd start with Minteh because he's the most direct kind of comparison. He's a right winger, 19 years old. So he spent last season on loan at Feyenoord. And I'll just say this graphic's lifted from Twitter from WT Analysis. So if you do give Will a follow, it's WT_analysis on Twitter, and I'll just talk through it for people who are listening, not watching. So Minteh's 19 years old, a right winger, spent last season on loan at Feyenoord, 10 goals and 6 assists in 27 games. But interestingly, he only started half of those. And as you can see from the chart on the screen, he was just elite in the Dutch league. Always a caveat around the Dutch league of how good or bad it actually is. But he ranked really highly on just about everything for attacking stats for a winger, and apart from shot accuracy. And I'll just put Elanga's up that was done as well, so you can see a comparison. The numbers are significantly worse for Elanga, but there's obviously the huge caveat that it's the Premier League, a better league. And Elanga, I'll ask Rob what he thinks about Elanga towards the end, but he's only 21 as well, 22, excuse me, just turned 22 not long ago, and a very talented, upwardly mobile player who I'm a big fan of, even if he can frustrate. But what's your take on Minteh, Rob? He's valued at about 40 million. He was close to going to Lyon, and Everton wanted him. He looks very direct. He looks a bit like Elanga, actually, in the way he plays. Quick, direct, very confident. How are Newcastle fans viewing him?
It's a real strange situation, because if we'd have had this conversation in the January transfer window, I think a lot of fans would have just been sell, because up until around then at Feyenoord, he'd not really hit the ground running. He'd had a few kind of knockbacks in terms of criticism from fans, and then almost after Christmas he came alight in the league and obviously finished with quite impressive stats, 10 goals and 6 assists, and was played a vital role for them. And so there was a lot of optimism coming out at the end of the season, him coming back at least to the club for the first time, because he's never actually played for the club or pulled on the black and white shirt, which is another thing which is quite strange. But maybe getting back at pre-season, see how he did. If he did well, potentially including him in the squad for the new season, or more likely, I think a lot of people thought he'd go out on another loan, potentially to maybe another Premier League club. And then obviously very quickly this situation's unfolded, where I think quite brutally and quite honestly, it's just the fact that they can make so much profit from it from a transfer point of view that it results being the best opportunity for Newcastle to not breach PSR, which is such a shame, because obviously he seems to have had a relatively decent season in the Dutch league. I think his attributes are something that could really help this Newcastle side, and also it's a position this season, right midfield, where they're really looking to strengthen. They've got Almir on there really at the minute, and they've got a few others such as Jacob Murphy who can play there, but they really wanted to upgrade there this season, and potentially could have had a breakthrough season. But I think it's one of those things that needs must. I think from a Forest point of view, I think they'd be getting a great up and coming talent, but like they said with those stats, he has been playing in the Dutch league, and how many players have we seen that have transferred over and not made that impact, or made a lesser impact? And I'm not saying that would be the case with Minteh, but I think just seeing the likes of clubs that have been linked with him, such as Forest and Brighton and Everton, have also been linked with him. It shows you that there's a pedigree there. There's obviously a lot of optimism around him, and I would be sad if Newcastle would have to sell him. But I think, when you look at the list and who the others might be, I think might be the best case scenario for the club at the moment.
Yeah, I was reading about Eddie Howe being a fan of Elanga after that Boxing Day game, where obviously he was really good, and that was our best performance of the season. So you can see why Newcastle like Elanga. I guess in an ideal scenario, like you were saying around the potential, Minteh's only 19. He was signed from Scandinavian football, so he's not had that Premier League grounding yet. I mean, ideally, you want to keep him. It must be a big frustration for Newcastle fans that PSR's forcing the hand when you've got, the richest owners in the world. Whatever we think about the political situation, it must be annoying for Newcastle fans.
It's a really strange situation, because it's obviously there's a lot of frustration now creeping in. I think not just for Newcastle fans, but for a lot of clubs, the likes of Forest, Everton, even the likes of Leicester, who got promoted into the Premier League this season over these PSR rules. And look, all the clubs signed up for them, so they knew that we're getting into. They knew they have to, balance on this high wire. But it just shows you the farce of the system, really, when they're going to have to sell players that they don't want to sell just to satisfy kind of bookkeeping. And it will be a shame if you were to go, because you'd never get to see him pull on the black and white shirt and see what potentially could do. Look, we could be sitting here in 2 years' time, the sale doesn't go through and he's been a complete flop and he's been sold on for a loss. Or on the flip side, he could be, lighting it up in the Champions League for Newcastle or another club. So it's just such a shame that our kind of love of the game and what we want from the game is almost kind of now being just run by a spreadsheet. And I know we've spoken about it before on here, and I just think it's not the way that you want to be sitting there going with this strange deadline on June the 30th, right in the middle of the European Championships, when all your concern is whether you're going to sell a winger you've never seen play for your club to balance the books, or potentially it might even not that, because for a lot of the rumours out of Newcastle, it was that Minteh would have to be sold, but also potentially someone else as well. So you're losing a couple and then you get to July the 1st again and the clock almost resets, but you're maybe 1-2 players down, a lot of potential out the window, and who are we going to bring in? So it's I think the big word, and from what I've seen on social media, speaking to other Newcastle fans, is just a sense of just strange frustration.
Would you take the points deduction? It's a bit different for Forest because, if we get a points hit, we'll probably be right in the thick of a relegation battle. We might be anyway. If it's Newcastle and you take an 8-point hit, you're probably going to go from pushing for top 6 to top 8 or top 10. Is there a temptation amongst Newcastle fans to take that hit?
Well, I spoke to a couple of Newcastle supporting friends about it, and I think it all came down to who the player was. If it was a question of saying, right, if we have to beat this PSR rat, we've got to sell Alexander Isak, I think, or Bruno Guimaraes, people were saying, I'd rather take the points hit. Whereas if it's for somebody like a Minteh or somebody like an Almiron, I think people would rather try and brush through the sale kind of thing and take the hit. I just think it depends who it is. But I just think at the minute, the players that we're talking about are kind of more squad players. Whereas if we were to lose a real, I'm not saying that Minteh won't be, but I think because he has that the least connection to Newcastle fans because they've never actually seen him play, I think it would be the best of a worst situation. But like you say, I think there's a lot of fans out there saying almost just kind of take the hit. And there was a lot of fans saying that last year when we were in a struggling time during January, we'd come through a really terrible period of form, especially like when we played Forest on Boxing Day. One of the big things that a lot of fans were saying almost were invest the money in January, buy a couple of players to get us out of this mess and try and take the points deduction. In the end, we didn't need it. But I think a lot of fans, I know it's not as easy to say that because they're not sitting in the chair doing the finances, but a lot of fans potentially might take the hit if it was to have a massive detriment to the team. To say if they were to sell Alexander Isak for a hell of a lot of money, you could sell him for £150 million tomorrow to Chelsea if they had the money. But what's it going to cost you to replace a player like that in your team?
Oh, don't get me started on Chelsea and the way they're able to sign players still. It's ridiculous. That's another topic. I saw they've signed 2 and they're linked with, they've virtually signed another 4 before selling anyone. It's ridiculous. Right, they sold Matson. Right, just before we go into Elliot Anderson, quick word for our sponsors of Trent Navigation. You can still get tickets for England v Slovakia tomorrow. There's limited general admission tickets available. VIP is sold out. If you go to gigantic.com, you can get tickets for general admission. The fan zone opens at 12 if you fancy a pizza for lunch before the game. So go down and enjoy that. Right, let's talk about Elliot Anderson. Again, Forest players, when they saw this one, thought, well, no thanks really. He's not a regular for Newcastle, but he is very promising. He's 21 years old. He had this great loan at Bristol Rovers, and then he was playing for Newcastle, got a back injury that really held him back. But he's a central midfielder who can play left wing. He's got an eye for goal by the look of it. And obviously I'll ask Rob about some more on that. But his attacking kind of progressive midfield stats are really interesting. Obviously, we've got 4 midfielders, so we're quite well covered in the sense of numbers. But it was a problem area for us last year. So in terms of numbers for Elliot last season, 2 assists in 21 Premier League games. Only 10 of them were starts because Newcastle were quite well stocked in that area. And obviously, like I said, hampered by injury, 4 months out, and then time to ease back in. So the middle of the season was basically a wipeout for him. What's your take on him as a player, Rob?
I really like him. It's one of those strange ones where he had this amazing loan spell, like you said, at Bristol, and including, I think, if people remember that amazing game when they got promoted on the last day of the season where they had to score 7 goals or something ridiculous, and he scored the winner. Joey Barton was the manager at the time and sung his praises, and he came back, and a lot of people, again, a bit like Minteh, thought he'd go back out on loan, but Eddie Howe kept him there, and he got quite a bit of exposure. And then the last season, he got an unfortunate injury. Right, it'd been the star of pre-season. We played out in America in this Premier League Cup. He'd been the man of the tournament for us. It looked like he was going to start that first game and almost like it's kind of carve a place out in midfield for him, which was amazing, really. Saying that we'd signed Sandro Tonali for £55 million, etc. He got this really bad back injury, which kept him out, and he kept getting setback after setback, which really hampered his development last season, because otherwise I think he would have gone on to start 30-plus Premier League games. He's a bit different to what we had in the squad as well. He's a really hard player to pin down. He can really see between the lines. He can operate on the wings, but also in central midfield. A lovely passer of the ball. Obviously, only 21. I think the biggest thing he can improve on is not yet scored. Ironically, the only goal he has scored was a disallowed one against Forest.
Yes, I
the
remember,
back post header, if people remember. And he came on in that game and actually made a real big difference. One of his better games for Newcastle. I can understand the trepidation from teams who would see that link and go, really? But people have got to think that he's 21. There's so much growth and development there. He's had quite a lot of games and exposure at such a young age. And for me, I think he's an exciting talent at Newcastle. I'd hate to see him go. But again, I think it's a needs must thing. I think, when you look at pecking orders in terms of midfield, he would probably be, at the minute, due to the injury and other players, probably fourth or fifth choice. And so if needs must, I can see why they would think about selling him. But I think any Premier League club would be getting a really good, roughish diamond, but we're not leaning a lot of polish to make a real impact, especially in that kind of number 10 role or on both rings. And if you want a bit of kind of like of a diverse player who can play along the top of the pitch, I think it's a sound investment. And also, I think if we removed these ridiculous swap deals that we're talking about at the minute, wouldn't command a massive fee either. So I think even after June 30th, if somebody was to come in and bid 10, 15 million for something, they'd be getting a real bargain. Earlier in the window, we were linked with the Wolves centre half, Max Kilman, and he was talked about in a swap deal for that. And I think Forest fans' views were echoed by Wolves fans. But I would actually say, if you sit back and watch him play, he can offer something a little bit different than what you would expect, especially from a homegrown player as well. He's almost got a foreign feel about the way that he touches the ball and offers a bit of an incisive path. So I think if the deal was to go through for Minteh and Anderson and we were to get Elanga, while Forest fans might be dismayed that they'd be losing a quality player, they'd also be getting two real strong prospects who could make a real difference in the next couple of years in the Premier League. And if not, I think would be able to be sold on for quite a pretty penny.
I'll ask you about Elanga in a sec, your take on him as a Newcastle fan, because I know you watch quite a bit of Forest because we're mates, and you actually listen to this podcast quite a bit as well. You do, yeah, which is great. So you said about Anderson there, is his best position more of a 10 than an 8, and he can play out wide if he needs to? Is that kind of the pecking order of his position?
Yeah, I would say so. I would, if it was me and I was picking that starting 11 for Newcastle and said you've got to pick Anderson, I would definitely drop him in behind the striker in the 10. We're giving him that bit of freedom where he can float over to the left if need be, but definitely starting as a 10. I don't think he's got, at the minute, from what I've seen of him play, he's not got the engine to be the number 8. And also perhaps that's where, if you said where's his weaknesses, from when I've seen him play, it's perhaps potentially defensively. And that's a problem for Newcastle to hold across the central midfielder. We've not really, apart from Joe Linton, got somebody who can really stick their foot in. And that's not a detriment because, Anderson has primarily been brought up as a number 10. So that's not going to be the focus of his game. So that's where I would say that he would fit in the Forest side. But I suppose the question then for you guys is that you've obviously got players such as Gibbs White, who I know Newcastle have been linked with in the past. And if we're being totally honest, sitting here today, he's not going to, he's not going to move him out of the side, but he'd be an amazing backup to bring off the bench for the last 20 minutes, which he's done a lot for Newcastle and made really big impacts.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking around the Gibbs White thing. And obviously we've got, smack the mic there. We've got Callum Hudson-Odoi as well, who's nailed that position, assuming he stays. So yeah, but we do need cover and quality cover. So that's good. What about Elanga then? You've seen a fair bit of him. When you saw this rumour from a Newcastle fan point of view, and it was Elanga, were you like, oh yes, please, or we should be doing better than that?
No, I'm one of these Newcastle fans who are just thinking you shouldn't turn your nose up on whoever kind of you link with, even players from the Championship. I think I was impressed with Langa when I saw him last year. Same with Callum Hudson-Odoi, and I thought, and I know that at the start of the summer, after the Premier League finished, there's rumours around the likes of Hudson-Odoi and Elanga, and I said that's the exact type of player profile that Eddie Howe likes and the side needs, just to change it up a bit on that right side of midfield. And even the left side of midfield for Newcastle has been pretty steady for the last couple of years. And the club have made a real kind of off-the-record view that that's where they want to impress. And for me, if this swap deal wasn't going ahead and somebody said we made a 20, 25 million pound bid for Elanga, I'd be more than happy with that. I think he'd provide great competition for the squad. I think he's young enough to make, grow and progress with the club. This is no detriment to him or the club either. And I think it wouldn't be a massive outlay either way. You see what some players are going for, the likes of the guy from Crystal Palace who's going to Bayern Munich for 60+ million. I think you've got to kind of really cut your cloth accordingly. And this summer, Newcastle have got to make 4 or 5 key signings just to kind of bulk out the squad. So if you could get an Elanga type in, I think it'd be fantastic. And then when the rumours came about and I saw that it was potentially a deal involving Minteh, for me, and it's kind of that old head on, you just go, right, Minteh could be amazing, but we know what Langa can do. He could hit the ground running in the Premier League. It'd suit Eddie Howe's style. And I think from day one, you'd have a really good player in the squad. Whereas Minteh, it is at the moment a toss of the coin, like it is with any kind of investment in a player of that young who's never played in the Premier League. So for me, it was an exciting bit of transfer rumour. And if we were to reconvene on July the 1st and the deal had gone through, or some kind of deal had gone through, I'd be more than happy that we'd got Elanga, into the squad, and I think he'd make a big impact for Newcastle next season.
Yeah, I think, and so much of it comes down to finances. You mentioned 25 million there. I think if we could get 30 and double our money, then that would be great. I suppose the thing with Elanga is he's so integral to how we play. We'll pick this up on Monday with Temps and I think maybe Kelvin. He hasn't replied yet, but hopefully we'll see who it is. But yeah, we'll pick it up on Monday. But yeah, Elanga's just so important to how we play. But if Minteh fits that mould, then yeah, it is of interest. It's worth considering, not dismissing, certainly. Right, we shall leave it there. As ever, if you haven't already, do us a favour, hit like on this video. Helps the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe as well. Give us a lovely review on iTunes, and do consider becoming a channel member. Like I say, we are back on Monday, or maybe sooner if something mad happens the way this weekend's going. We might be back tomorrow as well. But in the meantime, Rob, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
No, a pleasure. And you'll be back on, no doubt, before the games between the teams. Do you know when they are off the top of your head? I don't even look. I
did. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I sketched them out because I remember being on just before the horror show at St James's Park where I was going, well, I would take a 2-2 draw, but more than likely we would probably win. And then we completely collapsed. Chris Woods became the best player in the world for 90 minutes, and we kind of went into a terrible run from that. So I think there's a lot of Newcastle fans who'd like to get a bit of revenge from that. But the Forest were brilliant that day. They were absolutely fantastic. And like you say, just finishing off on that point about Elanga, I do think that Eddie Howe's, kind of ears were really pricked up with his performance, as well as with a lot of other Forest players that day, including the centre forward who we could have done with a bit of the last season, the one that we sold to you. So
yeah, true. Right, we'll leave it there. If we don't see you before Monday, have a good weekend, and we shall see you soon.